anytime now. What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast. For me and my good friend, Dr. Zayas God, who occasionally see eye to eye on movies, will review horror movies and streaming shows. In this case, we are talking about the movie Unbreakable, which Danny and I do see eye to eye. Danny, how you doing this morning?
This morning, I'm good, and I'm ready to get back into the M Nights of summer as we continue with our trek down the Shyamalan roller coaster, career roller coaster. Yes. We reviewed his daughter, Ishana's first feature film last week, which is still in theaters now, The Watchers. I think we both kind of agreed that we liked parts of that movie, but that overall it was kind of a flawed package. I think I'd recommend people to see it, but I could totally see people not loving it either. So wanted to bookend The Watchers with Trap later this summer, which is M. Night Shyamalan's latest film starring Josh Hartnett, which looks really cool. And so, we picked out a bunch of M. Night Shyamalan movies, and we decided to start with one of our favorites, not his second movie, but his second movie into his big break, which is appropriately Unbreakable.
Yeah. Good job, man. Good job setting that all up. You say not his second movie. His first movie is Wide Awake, starring Rosie O'Donnell. And I have not seen it.
I think he actually had a movie before that, back in like 1992.
Really? It might have been that he wrote the screenplay for it. But this is the third film that he wrote the screenplay and directed.
Okay.
Yeah. But, I remember Unbreakable. I worked in a movie theater prior to that, and I worked at the Atrium in Staten Island. I was one of the ushers, just like you were an usher and working in a movie theater, and I worked there during The Sixth Sense. And in The Sixth Sense, that was like the big thing. That was what everyone was going to get tickets for. And then I remember cleaning up the aisles when people were leaving and everyone was all excited. And I actually had the twist ending of The Sixth Sense ruined for me before I saw it by this girl that I was trying to date at the time. And she had already seen it. But with Shyamalan and The Sixth Sense, it was such a big deal at the time. For a movie to be like... I wrote
it down here. The Sixth Sense, on a $40 million budget, made $293 million domestically and $672 million worldwide.
Insane.
And
insane.
We as horror fans, we latch on to this new crop of horror directors, from Jordan Peele to Ari Aster and Robert Eggers, and these new visionary directors. Now, obviously, Jordan Peele has had a lot more monetary success, but but people knew who Jordan Peele was. He was a famous. Now, obviously, he was a comedian. Nobody had ever heard of M. Night Shyamalan. And we went through this. It's funny because I also, as you said, I was a movie theater usher in the UA movie theater, which is still there now as a Regal in Sheepshead Bay.
Nice.
Ironically, my son works there now, so
that's
passing
cool.
on the tradition.
Okay.
The Sixth Sense was an event. And it's so weird for a movie that is directed by a no-name director who's making it big for the first time.
Yeah.
It's so weird for that to be the it movie, right. and I'll make the comparison to the Blair Witch Project. That became an overnight sensation, but not because of the movie, more because of the viral marketing and the questions of was it real and was it not?
Right.
And those two directors never really made it big. They're not household names, right?
Sure. No, I don't know who they are. Yeah.
I know one of them is Eduardo Sanchez.
Okay.
because I think he worked on Satanic Panic, Satanic
Oh,
Hispanics last
right,
year.
right.
But Shyamalan became the it guy in Hollywood. Like Unbreakable came out uh 18 months after The Sixth Sense. I think The Sixth Sense came out in August of 99. Unbreakable came out, and I remember this, it came out Thanksgiving 2000 because my best friend Josh, him and I have had a tradition since 1999
Oh my
where the
God.
Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we go to the movies every year and then we go out for a turkey dinner. That's our
Dang.
weird Thanksgiving tradition. We have
Yeah.
gone out every year since 1999. The first movie we did was End of Days, starring
Oh,
Arnold Schwarzenegger and Gabriel Byrne.
yes, a
And
classic.
Unbreakable was movie number two.
Yes. Yeah, I think End of Days is really a movie number two, right? But like that is a
I like
25-year
those.
tradition, man. That's awesome. That's freaking impressive. I remember seeing Unbreakable with a really good friend of mine too at the time. Like this was a guy that was like my best friend at the time. We went with a group of people and we went to a pretty late showing. When we walked out, everybody was sitting there kind of laughing at the very end of the film. People were talking, you could overhear them saying kind of like, what was that? Or like, what that was, and then you hear people saying the movie was stupid, but then secretly my friend and I looked at each other and we were like, that was amazing. And Unbreakable,
I'm here. Don't worry.
no, I believe you. Unbreakable is this weird film because like Shyamalan makes this movie that's this drama that's very scary in certain points with The Sixth Sense, and it has this twist ending, and it's quotable. I see dead people. People love this movie, and his follow up is something that's very different. It's nothing to do with ghosts. There's not any kind of, I mean, there's a couple of scenes that I would say are maybe scary, especially at the end in Unbreakable, but it's not a horror movie at all. It's a completely different beast.
It's
And
it's it's like a dramatic thriller almost.
yeah, yeah,
That is probably the secretly the best comic book movie
right, right,
ever made. It
right.
it it almost reminded me a movie that we both fucking love that we have talked about on this channel before.
Yeah,
It reminded me of Darkman in the sense that it's like it's a comic book movie
good point.
that is not based on any comic book. That is right
Yeah,
out of the mind of the director,
yeah,
and it's obviously where Darkman is Sam Raimi, loud in your face, crazy effects and everything else. This movie is so reserved and
yeah, yeah,
it to a point where it Bruce Willis in this movie. This was like the good period of Bruce Willis.
yep,
Outside of course, like he was a great actor for many years, but from like the mid '90s to the mid 2000s, he was on a really big hot streak.
yep,
He had done obviously like Pulp Fiction in '94, but then like you get like you go from like 12 Monkeys to The Fifth Element to The Sixth Sense to Unbreakable. He was just a rock, and
yep.
he's so reserved in this movie. And like he almost feels like a continuation of his character in The Sixth Sense because these are the quietest performances
Yeah, yeah,
for him. And even Samuel L. Jackson in this movie, where like he has a chance to, this is a character that there's a chance for him to become that kind of over the top Joker-esque villain, and he never does. He
yeah.
always stays perfectly calm within character. And I'm rewatching it last night, just thinking like, man, I forgot how quiet this movie is, considering
Sure.
the subject matter.
Yep.
And it never gets boring. It's always so riveting what's happening because you're like
Mm-hmm.
so invested in these characters. And there's a couple scenes, we talk about horror movie stuff. There's one scene in this movie, the scariest scene in this movie for me is the scene, and it's not traditional horror at all is the scene with the son and the gun.
Oh yes, yes,
in the
yes, yes,
kitchen.
yes. Yeah.
And that's like the one scene where characters get loud.
Yeah.
Really.
Bruce Willis is fantastic in that scene.
Oh,
too. Yeah.
I was reading on IMDb that the actor who plays the kid, who's fantastic in this movie, the son,
Agreed.
that he said that like people walked off set like because they were so emotionally upset by that scene.
Wow.
And yeah, just a fantastic, like there's family drama in this. It really is a very big departure from the movies that we typically cover on this show. But I'm glad that we're covering it because I think M. Night Shyamalan has become almost a punchline in many ways. In how when people talk about his movies,
Right.
you can use his name as a verb. Oh, they Shyamalan the ending. And it's become a punchline for a lot of people, and in a way, it could be maybe self-inflicted, as we'll talk about with the ending of this movie and with other movies that we cover later this month.
Right.
But to go back to the year 2000 I walked out of this movie and I remember thinking, well, this was my favorite movie of the year.
Right.
This is my new favorite director.
Yeah. Now let's go have a turkey dinner.
Sixth Sense in this in an 18-month period.
Yeah.
It's just you think there's no possible way that this director can mess things up or have
and for him his filmography for like the first 4 movies where he's on the radar, right? Because we're not counting the Rosie O'Donnell one. For his first like 4 movies, this The Sixth Sense, The Village, and Signs, his movies were like event movies, right? Where it was like, oh, okay, this is the new M. Night Shyamalan movie. And even though The Village did not get as great a response as The Sixth Sense, like it's still, I think it's a really well-made movie. This movie did, I think this movie did well at the box office, but I know just based on what people would say that like they weren't into it like they were The Sixth Sense.
Well, to that point, I also wrote down the box office numbers for this one because The Sixth Sense grossed almost 700 million worldwide, almost 300 million domestically. This movie, first of all, the budget for this movie was $75 million in the year 2000. And I don't know about you, but I don't know where that money went because this movie doesn't feel like a 75 million. Like when I hear 75 million, I'm expecting them to show the train crash. That's what. And there's nothing in this movie. There's no huge effects and crazy. Right. So I'm thinking maybe that it was like maybe Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson cost that much money.
Of course.
This movie only made $95 million domestically on a $75 million budget. It made just about $250 million worldwide. But I mean, that's a kind of a wake-up call right away where your first movie, which is nominated for multiple Oscars, including Best Picture, and I think he might have gotten a Best Director nomination. I know he got a Best Screenplay nomination also. To make $300 million domestically on a $40 million budget, $700 million worldwide, and then 18 months later, your follow-up movie with the same lead actor and Samuel L. Jackson barely pops a domestic profit and, I guess triples the budget worldwide is I gotta say that's probably looked down. Now I think Signs was, and I haven't looked up Signs box office, but
Yeah.
I would have to think Signs is bigger because I remember
Sure.
the
Of course.
marketing campaign for Signs was massive. All
Yeah.
those posters with the crop circles,
Yeah.
Mel Gibson still at, pre-scandal Mel Gibson when he was still very much a top 5 movie star.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Oh yeah.
the whole idea of aliens. I'm willing to bet Signs was a big rebound.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I think that possibly what happened is Unbreakable, and I think you kind of hit on this where you were talking about your theatrical, the reaction that people in your theater had.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people walked out of The Sixth Sense and maybe they were like, "Oh, I wonder what is there going to be a twist in this movie?"
Yeah.
And then we got the twist in this movie, and it was like, "Oh, okay, so whatever happens in the first 95% of these movies, it's all setting up for this one thing at the end."
Right. Right.
But I want to, and I think we've said this before with The Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a twist at the end of The Sixth Sense that Bruce Willis has been dead the whole time. And yes, there is a twist in Unbreakable that obviously Samuel Jackson is the one who has been causing these disasters and that he is the arch nemesis supervillain to David Dunn. But as much as those are twists, they make perfect sense within the movie.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think the problem is the word twist, and like to Shyamalan an ending has been to have an out of nowhere twist that really doesn't make any sense. And I think that maybe even M. Night Shyamalan got roped into this with The Village. Now, I haven't watched The Village in over probably 20 years, and I'm actually looking forward to rewatching it because I don't remember a lot of details. I remember watching it in the theater thinking, this isn't bad, and then the ending happened, and I remember thinking, oh, God. So, but for The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable, the twists, yes, they are last minute, like, gotchas, but they also make perfect sense. Like, Elijah in this movie he doesn't ever hide the fact that he is looking for his complete opposite, and that's what draws him to David Dunn. And if you think back, obviously it helps to rewatch the movie, but if you think back to every interaction they have, it's very comic book hero villain relationship.
Absolutely.
And you know this better than I do. So it makes perfect sense there. And like I watched this with Charlotte last night, and I love the idea that David only starts to really understand his power and then master his power as he gives in more to the idea that this is real.
Yeah.
Just like the idea that like when the first time he gets like a bump, it's like a blip, but then like later on you get like the full visions.
Yes.
And like that's he doesn't just instantly become a superhero.
Right.
Like he has to like fine tune his power. And it's like you think about every DC and Marvel comic book movie origin story.
Right.
The first half of those movies is the character learning about their power and understanding how to use it. Spider-Man does it in Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man does it. Christian Bale's Batman does it. That's what the entire first hour of Batman Begins is. You know, him in Japan and with the League of Shadows. That's what even in Man of Steel, where you know Clark is learning about his powers as Superman before he becomes Superman. Doctor Strange is, you know, learning how to use everything. It really does feel like a perfect comic book movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you brought up a really good point just now where you're talking about when his powers seem to really manifest on screen, and it's at the very end when he starts bumping into people and having these visions. I think that you talking about before the like where did the money for this movie go? I think that sequence probably used up a lot of money, but just like you said, having Samuel L. Jackson and Bruce Willis in the same movie was probably the biggest cost for this film. You know, this movie is very subdued, and it's also very good at revealing things without showing it, but revealing it in such an interesting way, right? Like many of the shots in this movie are framed in a very interesting way. The very first thing we see in this movie is a doctor in a department store who's helping a woman that just gave birth. And the shot is framed to where we are looking into a mirror, and it's reflected at the doctor and the mother together. And I think that's really interesting because Samuel Jackson's character is called Mr. Glass. We're looking at a glass mirror right off the bat. But like when it comes to comic books, which this is obviously very much inspired by, and movies in general, you can do a standard shot where it's like, okay, these are the two characters that are talking. This is them in the frame. Or you can do something more dynamic and interesting. And this movie always errs on the side of dynamic and interesting. Whether it's that first sequence where you find out about, Elijah's birth and how he was hurt because of his special condition that he has. Then there's the sequence right after that where Bruce Willis is on a train. The train is about to crash. There's this building tension just based on kind of this awkward conversation that Bruce Willis has with this woman on the train. But then there's also this tension because the camera, I don't know if I've ever seen this in another film, honestly. I mean, obviously I've seen a camera go back and forth like this between two characters, but it's done like through seats on a train. So you just see like a little sliver of them. You're almost like a passenger sitting in front of them, just overhearing their awkward conversation, and you get little glimpses of them through the seats. This movie is filled with shots like that. At one point, I mean, so essentially we go from Bruce Willis talking to this woman on a train, and he knows she's going to sit next to her, and we see him take off his ring, right? Then after she kind of awkwardly calls him out and says, I have a boyfriend, or I'm married, or something like that, we cut to the hospital, and it's framed where Bruce Willis is in the background in the hospital with doctors talking to him. And then the foreground, kind of out of focus, is a person on an operating table. And we just see their chest kind of moving slightly, and we hear their breathing. And eventually we see blood kind of pool up into their blankets. And this is all just basically telling the audience there's two people that survived this massive train crash. One is Bruce Willis back there. The other is this guy right here dying in the front. And it's interesting because it's almost like a play. Everything that's major that would require tons of special effects or a lot of different shots is described versus shown. And when they do show it, they try to make it when they describe it, they try to make it as interesting as possible. So, I mean, Shyamalan, his style changed over time with the course of his films. And I think that one key thing, and you can go into this now if you want, but like, his dialogue was way sharper in his first few movies than it was now. I mean, I remember going to see Old and just like groaning out loud within the first like 5 minutes of the fucking movie because of the dialogue. And it was just like dialogue that was in The Happening. And there's stuff in The Village. There's these like kind of weird little speeches that people make in all of these movies that like, it's like no one would say this. No one in the real world would say this. But in Unbreakable, even with Samuel L. Jackson's weird comic book superhero, villain, and hero theories, the movie, it's never goofy. It's very serious. They take the comic book stuff very serious. I think this movie might have actually fucking helped me get back into comics after I gave them up in the 90s because they were A, bad at that point, but B, I also kind of didn't want girls to know that I read comics. And then, and then eventually I came back into it. I think maybe because I watched this movie and I was like, yeah, fucking comic books are deep, man. The bad guys do wear purple, like go ahead,
I was gonna say, like, you just mentioned the purple, like watching it again and like noticing how drab the movie is, but then knowing that it's done on purpose. Again, like you mentioned Shyamalan's style, but also and his dialogue, but his visual style where everything is very drab throughout the movie, and then there's these big moments of color, and every time there's a big moment of color, it's very symbolic. There's a woman in red in a scene that is eerily similar to The Matrix. A woman in a red dress walks by and he gets a vision that she's a thief. Then you have obviously the guy who's the killer at the end, where the bright orange janitorial suit and purple, of course, bright purple, which for Samuel L. Jackson is just perfect.
Yes.
And those moments are also they're very comic book, but they fit perfectly within the story that's being told. And Samuel Jackson, I think he's become he is to the point in his career now, and I believe he's in his like mid 70s or early 70s now, where he is just Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah.
But you forget how great of an actor that he is when he like gets into one of these characters, and he never, like I said earlier, he never really goes over the top. Even with his big reveal at the end, it's not like an over the top, it's like this was catharsis for him.
Yeah.
Like the entire movie is about Mr. Glass, Elijah's catharsis of why am I here? Why am I like this?
Yeah.
I need to know why I am the way I am. And if it means that I have to kill hundreds of people to find out that answer, I'm going to do it.
Right.
And how happy he is at the end. No, we see the letters on the screen. He's going to, jail. He's going to be in an institution for the rest of his life. But he's happy now. He has purpose. He's achieved his goal, and it's this amazing performance by Samuel L. Jackson. Like he's so good in this movie, and
absolutely, yeah.
I just love the two of them. I apparently, Shyamalan wrote this movie with the two of them in mind, and and of course we can't overlook the fact that they have amazing chemistry. Die Hard with a Vengeance, of course, came out in 95.
That sounds right.
Yeah. I mean, they had been in Pulp Fiction together, but I don't think they have a scene together. No. Obviously, Bruce Willis and John Travolta do. But Bruce Willis and Samuel Jackson, obviously, part of why action movie fans love Die Hard with a Vengeance is because of that interaction, because of Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson together, basically as a team, the whole movie. And I think Shyamalan was so smart to get an acting combo here that had previous experience together, had like a built-in chemistry before they even walk on set.
Yeah.
You can't get characters that are as different as John McClane and David Dunn.
Right.
John McClane is an action hero, but he's a loud, brash New York City cop who loves to quip at the bad guys. And David Dunn almost feels like a silent character most of this movie. You can't get characters that are different than Zeus,
Zeus.
the
Yeah.
Harlem street, store owner who is, cursing his brains off in Die Hard with a Vengeance,
Right.
to Elijah Price, who is this very reserved comic book, art gallery owner in Unbreakable. But they had that built-in chemistry, and I think it worked out so well here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you made some points that actually I kind of wanted to make. I wanted to reference Die Hard with a Vengeance, and then that's really, really important to show that both of them are very different in these two movies. What I'll talk about instead is about how their stories in this movie are told in a way that's more similar to comic books than you would think. Like basically, the movie starts out where it shows Elijah's birth, right? Then it does this kind of weird thing, not even halfway through the movie, but like in the first act, where it cuts to Elijah as a kid again, and he doesn't want to go outside. He's in I think he's in a wheelchair. He's got a cast on and stuff, and he doesn't want to go outside. His mom says, "I left a present for you outside." She's left him, a comic book or whatever for him to go pick up, but he has to go outside and get it. To me, that's very much like a comic book where essentially that would be the beginning of another issue, is him as a kid, a flashback again. Like when you're doing a movie where, one of the main characters is essentially the villain, maybe the audience doesn't know it yet, but like one of the main characters is a villain, you don't have like these sequences where you have a flashback all of a sudden again, like midway through. It wasn't the way movies were done back then. Nowadays, with like Netflix and stuff like that, things have changed and you could have a thing like this. But it's very much like, an issue of a comic ends. Then we start off with another flashback, kind of giving us an idea about Mr. Glass. But like Shyamalan definitely like knew about comics, researched comics, knew how they worked. He put in all these archetypes that like they educated me on comics when I saw this movie. And then he makes Samuel L. Jackson have such a reverence for comics that if you like comics at all and when you watch this movie, it makes you be like, yeah, they are fucking good. I'm not like a man child. They're like deep, man.
I mean, you and Brian, and listen, if you guys like hearing Pete wax poetic about comics, you should go and subscribe to Comic Books Transformed, his channel with Brian that I have guested on several times. They're covering The Boys. They're covering The Acolyte. But yeah, you comics are deep, man. Like you guys just covered X-Men 97.
Oh.
And like the X-Men are like one of the deepest comic groups in the world. Like the idea that this is the entire conceit of the X-Men is that they're using the idea of being a mutant is, as a way of being different and fighting for equal rights. And it could be looked at as the civil rights movement through a series of comics about Wolverine and Cyclops and, I'll like you made the joke before you stopped reading comics because you didn't want girls to know you read comics. I think that's one of the biggest things that I can go back if I tell myself when I was younger is embrace the shit you love even harder, because there are girls that love that shit, and the girls that love that shit are fucking awesome. Like I wish I could go back and tell like my 16-year-old self, wear your pro wrestling shirts, your horror movie shirts, and your comic book shirts out in public. And for every 8 people that walk by and give you a dirty look, the 2 that look at you are going to be like your best fucking friends.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
and it's just it's just funny how that works out. But
Yeah. But it's
I
funny too because when this movie came out, you had the X-Men movie, right? You had the first X-Men movie came out in 2000, and then I think Spider-Man came out in like 2001. It's the beginning of this era of comic book movies being like the main thing in the box office, right? But it was a different time. It was a different time. And when people would talk about comics and stuff, you just kind of would have to kind of hold your head down and stuff. These kids don't know how good they have it now, where like, you can go on a date and just like talk about fucking Wolverine and like people will know what you're referencing, and be like, oh, do you mean like the Wolverine like that's in Logan? When it's like it's just the fact that they know this kind of shit. You're like, oh god, you guys are so fucking lucky. But he was like ahead of its time. And it's funny because there is a woman in this movie. We've yet to mention her. She's played by one of my favorite fucking actresses, Robin Wright. And it's Bruce Willis's wife, Audrey Dunn in this movie. And, as a kid, because I think this movie came out in 99, so I'd be like 17, maybe. I don't think I was 18. I might have been 18. This comes out and I guess I was kind of bored by the sequences with Bruce Willis and Robin Wright. But as a man now who's 41 and, is married for quite a while, been with my wife for a while, you feel it. You feel that strain in this movie between these two characters. And you have Bruce Willis and Robin Wright acting off of each other. Their scenes are few and far between. And she does have a sequence with Samuel L. Jackson as well. But for what it does for the plot, their relationship is very important, and you really do need a quality actor for that too.
mm-hmm.
And luckily, Shyamalan did not overindulge with the dialogue. And there's this one kind of silly part where they go on a date together, and Bruce Willis is asking her what her favorite song is, and she's like, I something with "Wet" in the title by Prince. It's like "Wet and Hot" or something. But that's the closest thing to that sort of Shyamalan goofiness with dialogue. Otherwise, their scenes about their marriage, very serious, very believable. You feel the tension in their marriage. And, in this movie, it's not like a comic book movie in the sense that, like, you would know that Samuel Jackson was onto something in a comic book movie. Whereas in this, it's like, oh, is Samuel Jackson crazy? So
I like that. I like that he brings his son to meet him the first time, and then like his wife meets him. So they've all met him, and they're all at various points. They're like, we should call the police if he ever contacts us again.
Right.
But then
right.
like there's other scenes where David meets Elijah's mother, and he's like, yeah, I guess we are kind of friends now. It's really, so I was watching this movie and I'm laying in bed and Charlotte's laying with me and we're watching Unbreakable. And as we're laying in bed, me with my child, the scene happens where Bruce Willis is laying in bed with his son and his wife, who sleeps in another room in the house, knocks on the door. And I start laughing and Charlotte's like, what happened? And I was like, well, and I've mentioned this before, that Athena does not sleep in bed with me almost ever because she was sick of waking up in the middle of the night because of my snoring.
Mm-hmm.
And she would wake up in the middle of the night and she'd go sleep on the couch.
Sure.
And she got tired of doing that. And she just decided, I'm just going to sleep on the couch.
Yeah.
My marriage is fine. But we basically sleep in different rooms most of the time. So it was just really funny that scene is on the screen as I'm laying in bed with my child while my wife was sleeping in the other room.
There you go.
And I brought that up to Charlotte, and Charlotte started laughing. And I was like, okay, it's good that we can laugh about this because in the movie it's a lot more tense and dramatic. But like to your point, also their relationship is not just played for, oh, we have a character who's in a marriage that he's unhappy with. It's part of his origin story. There he gave up football and he faked a injury in a car accident to so that they can be together, because he knew she would leave him if he kept playing football.
Yeah.
And that is because that's pivotal to the whole idea of, even for him, in his mind, he was hurt in that car accident.
Yeah.
And so he can't have his full power until he comes to the personal realization, I never got hurt in that accident. I faked it all for her. And now that he has that phone call with Elijah where he's like, I've never been hurt. I've never been sick. What now?
Right.
And that leads to, I believe, the train station scene where he's like, theft of jewelry.
Yeah.
All right. Rape. Let me see if I can find something worse. Murder. Okay. And he's like, going out and looking for like the worst person he could find to stop and to, be a hero.
Right.
Did you ever read the DC comic of the Spectre? Because I read that was a big influence in his design.
I did. Oh, absolutely.
I mentioned his design. It's a raincoat.
Yeah. He can hang out on the same team as the Killer, and I Know What You Did Last Summer. Yeah, but
I do love that. I'm sorry, but that entire scene in the house where he rescues, the way it's shot is so fucking great, where you never see his face in the bathroom when he's rescuing the kids. You never see his face. It's always just covered in shadow. The way Shyamalan uses shadows in this movie is so fucking great. The long takes that he uses are so great. The way they establish the water and drowning as like his kryptonite, and then it's the kids that save him at the end.
Right.
That whole scene in that house is so tense and so scary in a way, and it's that one scene that really is kind of scary for this movie that is not a horror movie at all.
Right. He's kind of like, showing off his horror movie chops at the very end there. But that's what this movie is. It's a bunch of moments that don't have any dialogue, that stand out and are exceptional and memorable. And then there are scenes where they're dynamically shot and the dialogue is actually interesting when they're explaining things to you. And you kind of talked about his bonding with his son, even though the marriage with his wife is strained. One of my favorite sequences in this movie is when he's lifting weights and he's kind of surprised at how much he can lift. Then he tells his son, take off the weight because it's kind of dangerous. I shouldn't be lifting this. But his son actually, lies and puts more weight on. Then Bruce Willis, David kind of is like, okay, let's keep putting more on. They put on the max amount of weight they can. And eventually they got fucking buckets added to his bar too. And that's one of the best in the movie. I remember that when I saw it. Go ahead.
It's really funny that I guess Charlotte has been trained so well to expect certain things in movies, namely horror movies, that she was so uncomfortable watching that scene because I think she kept expecting the bar to fall or for him to get, his arms to break. She was like,
yeah.
Like you could tell if she were in that basement, she would have been with the son, like moving up the stairs, because she was like, "What's going to happen? Is he going to?" And I'm like, "Just watch." It's like this. And that's a great the way that scene is shot with the camera zooming in, and then so like as if the camera is sitting on top of the weight bar. There's this other great shot. I think it's when Elijah, as a kid, finds the comic and he's looking at it, and the camera kind of pans over as he's looking at the comic upside down.
Right.
And as it's going back over his head, it's turning. So like you get this like 360 shot of the comic, but you're always looking at the comic book upside down, and then finally it comes around. And I just love how he used that camera. And yeah, I'm thinking about the way I felt about Shyamalan back in the year 2000. I feel like Ari Aster did you see Beau is Not Afraid?
Not yet.
Okay. Beau is Not Afraid is a 3-hour movie, and it is insane. I can't even describe to you what that movie is.
Okay.
I enjoyed parts of it. I'm glad I watched it. But if somebody said to me, Beau is Not Afraid is the worst movie they ever saw, I'd be like, fair.
Yeah.
And when I saw Hereditary, I said, oh my God, this guy, Ari Aster, I'm going to be at every movie he ever makes first day, because that just blew me away. And then I saw Midsummer, and while I liked Midsummer, I did get a lot of those vibes. And then Beau is Not Afraid, and I'm like, and it, it makes me think about Shyamalan, because like you said, those first 4 movies were events. Like, yes. I went with a crowd of people to see The Village.
Yeah.
And some of those people who we've had on our channel really liked The Village, whereas I hated it. And for me, that was the line of demarcation where I was like, oh no, this is, and then of course, what happened after The Village, we get Lady in the Water and The Happening, and then the wheels were completely off. And it was like Shyamalan's fall from grace, like, hurt me as a film lover, and as a horror movie fan, and as somebody who wanted him to succeed.
Right.
But yeah, when Mr. Glass falls.
When Mr. Glass falls. Yeah. Well, I mean, you talk about Shyamalan's fall, but one of the sequences in this movie that's another really well shot, amazing sequence is when Mr. Glass falls. It's so well done. Samuel Jackson, his Elijah needs to prove a theory he has about David. David has one of his visions. He thinks that this man has a gun with a black or silver handle on him, and the guy leaves. Elijah's tracking him down. He's walking after him in this kind of empty football stadium. It's a very empty, kind of quiet moment when he's tracking him down. The guy goes down some steps. Elijah's trying to stop him. Elijah loses his footing, and so fucking clever. They show his cane hit the ground and shatter. I remember seeing that in 2000 and being like, oh, that's really smart. Because the cane basically is like, that's him. He's shattering as he hits the ground. And, you just hear Samuel Jackson's like anguish as he's broken on the ground once again. And this movie has multiple moments like that. It's just the way that it's shot. Go ahead.
But what's amazing about that scene is his physical anguish is replaced with almost a sense of euphoria as he's there upside down and he sees the guy jump the turnstile and he sees the gun, and so he knows that David had a moment of power where his superpower told him. He made physical contact with that guy. He knew he had a weapon. He saw a vision of it, and he was right. So it's this moment of like physical pain that alters him for the rest of the movie. He's going to be in the wheelchair now. it's weird. I just saw David Cronenberg's Crash, and then I saw this movie back-to-back days, and both movies feature a scene where characters' legs are completely put in like these giant pin-induced casts.
Yeah.
And but just the look on his face when he's there upside down, like, oh God, everything's broken. Oh God. But then he sees the gun, and you could just tell it's that moment of, okay, this was worth it.
So worth it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, right. And I mean, like, that's why this movie's so exciting, because you feel for Samuel Jackson throughout the whole movie. Really, I think that one of the reasons why the audience didn't, buy into this movie as much is because Samuel Jackson is very, very sympathetic throughout this whole movie. Like I said, you saw 2 flashbacks to his childhood where, he's just having this miserable beginning of his life. Then we see in the present day that has continued into his adult life. There's another really great sequence where, after he's basically been cut out of Bruce Willis's life, he's just sitting in a comic book store in the center of the frame, in the center of the store, and there's a clerk telling him, you got to leave, otherwise I'm going to call the cops, you got to leave. And they go to wheel him out, and he keeps making his wheelchair crash into, stands of comics, knocking them over. Another great sequence. But you feel for Samuel Jackson because he's such a good actor. And, these moments of silence. There's another moment after he does fall, after seeing the gun on the guy, where another great shot. The camera just slowly pans into his face, where it gets like right up to his eye as the doctor's just listing off all the ways that his body's been broken. It's you feel for Samuel Jackson. And then at the very end, there comes that twist. The twist is he is the one that actually made hundreds, maybe thousands of people die at this point. And I think that's maybe one of the things that turned audiences off, because Samuel L. Jackson did such a great job making people care about Mr. Glass. And then all of a sudden it's like, no. He's a bastard. He's killed innocent people, men, women, and children, just because he has to prove something. But then, like you've said already today too, it's like he had to do that because his life was just miserable and he needed some kind of validation. I mean, that's one of the last fucking things he says, is something like, to know who you are is so important. He says something like that, And I think that another thing that turns people off about the end of the movie is that Bruce Willis leaves and they talk about how he turns in the evidence. Now, we know that he turns in the evidence because the shot freezes on Bruce Willis, and then there's text at the bottom, which is often saved for a true story movie, right? Where like it freezes.
Charlotte actually asked me, like legit said to me, when the words came up on the screen, she went, wait, this is based on a true story? And I looked at her, I went, no.
Right, but the way that the movie is made, and I absolutely think this is intentional, is for your daughter to have that moment.
Yeah.
That Shyamalan is like, okay, we're going to make this to where someone would think this actually did happen. We're going to make this superhero movie as realistic as possible. And so then, it cuts to Bruce Willis. He turned in this evidence that got Elijah in trouble. Then we cut to Samuel Jackson, and he says, they called me Mr. Glass. There's like a pause before it freezes on him. And the music, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how good the music is in this movie.
James Newton Howard.
Yeah.
Fucking great score in this movie, yeah.
And it builds up to this kind of swelling point as Samuel Jackson has this pleading kind of like, I had to be the villain face, and the music is swelling, and Bruce Willis is just walking out. He can't believe what he's heard. And I think that that's one thing that kind of turned people off too, was that sort of like that based on a true story, like text at the very end. They couldn't at that time appreciate like, oh, no. They took this comic book idea and made it to where it's like, this could have been a biopic about a guy who never used his superhero powers when he was younger. And now he's finally doing it, I think it's incredible, and it's unbreakable. So let's talk about the sequels real quick before we wrap this up. Ready? Split and Glass. I have not seen Glass, but I know what happens in Glass. I have seen Split, and I actually really like Split.
Did you read on IMDb that apparently in the stadium, right before he pats down M. Night Shyamalan himself for drugs, he bumps into a woman in like a pink raincoat or like a pink outfit who is with a little boy, and he gets like a blip and he turns and gives a look. And apparently Shyamalan has confirmed that that kid is Kevin Crumb from Split, and that mom is the mom that like abuses him.
Wow.
So now obviously that's like, I don't think he had that idea in the year 2000, but it's really great to think about that because obviously we get the ending of Split that we do. And like that moment of, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Like this movie was crazy, but holy shit. And,
yes. That's fucking crazy. That's kind of like in Iron Man 2 when all the robots or whatever scanning the crowd and there's a kid that has an Iron Man mask on it and they basically say that is Peter Parker. That's fucking crazy that they're saying that that's James McAvoy as a kid getting abused.
So here's what I will say. You haven't seen Glass. I will say you should watch it.
Right?
No. I think you should watch it. It's another movie that the pieces are there for what should be an excellent final part of a secret trilogy. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think it gets lost. But I am kind of interested to see what you think about it. We are going to be talking about Split later this summer. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we need to reveal too much, but I think we are probably on the same page when I say we both really liked Split.
We are on the same page, yes.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I could give my 2 cents on Glass when we review Split. So I think that's a good time for us to wrap up our Unbreakable discussion. I actually really enjoyed talking about this with you today, and I'm really glad that this is one of the Shyamalan movies that you picked. You know, he has quite a few movies in his filmography at this point, and so you can cherry pick which ones to watch for a show like this. And this was a really wise choice because I've always liked this movie, even though I felt like a lot of people haven't. My wife really likes this movie, and she hates comic book movies, you know? so it was a lot of fun. You want to tell people which Shyamalan movie we're going to do next?
I believe we are going to do. We're doing The Village, right? That's next.
Oh, I thought it was like this, then The Visit, then The Village.
So yes, we're kind of bouncing around the filmography. We're going to the movie that I feel kind of helped to resurrect his career, which is the very low budget The Visit. We're going to be covering that next Saturday. Then we're going to go back to The Village, and then we'll probably get to Split, all to set up for Trapped, which comes out, I believe, the first week of August. But you don't have to wait that long to see us. We will be back in just a few days because our favorite show has episode 6 of season 2 coming out tomorrow night, Sunday night, Father's Day, and that is Interview with the Vampire on AMC.
Yep.
We are absolutely loving covering that show and talking about it and reading the comments and answering our comments that we get. Because a lot of you have told us that you guys are enjoying that show as well. So if you want to see our thoughts on Ishana Shalaman's The Watchers, we have our review of that up on the channel. If you want to see what I thought of the Netflix shark movie Under Paris, I have a 45-second short about that.
If you want to see what part of my body is unbreakable, you can subscribe to my OnlyFans.
Yes, there you go. I was going to say, we hadn't been horny the whole time. We had to get it in at the end.
Yes, the Bruce Willis movie, it was so subdued. I had to get a little bit of horniness at the very end.
But M. Night Shyamalan and Interview with the Vampire are the linchpins of our summer so far. So we appreciate you tuning in.
Yup. And so with that being said, we will catch you guys next time.